Good evening, everyone. My name's Ross Anderson. I'm a senior advisor on the Ontario Lines Community Engagement Team. I'd like to warmly welcome everybody who took the time out of their evening to join us tonight. At this meeting, we will provide an overview of construction happening at the future Moss Park Ontario Line subway station and what kind of construction we expect to see in the near future. This is the site where the future Moss Park station will exist at the intersection of Queen Street East and Sherbourne Street. Next slide, please. Before we begin, let us take a moment to acknowledge we are on the lands that have been and continue to be home to many Indigenous peoples, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Huron-Wendat peoples. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, as immigrants, or involuntarily as part of the transatlantic slave trade, in this generation or in generations past. We acknowledge the historic and continued impacts of colonization and the need to work toward meaningful reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. We acknowledge that Metrolinx operates on territories and lands covered by many treaties that affirm and value the rights of Indigenous communities, peoples, and nations. We understand the importance of working towards reconciliation with the original caretakers of this land. At Metrolinx, we will conduct business in a manner that is built on a foundation of trust, respect, and collaboration. Next slide, please. It's my pleasure to be your moderator for this evening's meeting. And my goal for tonight is to ensure that all of your questions are answered to the best of our ability and to keep this meeting on time. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and it will be made available on the Metrolinx YouTube page. There is a closed caption function available to you on your screen that you will have to enable. Well, this evening, I will be joined by my colleagues from Metrolinx and Ontario Transit Group, the construction team that is going to be building the Ontario Line stations and the tunneling. I'm also joined by James Francis. He's a senior manager for the subway sponsor at Metrolinx. Hi, James. We have Eric DeVera. Eric here is on screen as well. Hi, Eric. He's also a deputy station manager for the Moss Park station for the Ontario Line at OTG. And then, of course, Aga Stotska, environmental management for Ontario Transit Group. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'd also like to warmly welcome the elected official staff from Councillor Moyse's office. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening to join us. Next slide, please. We have prepared a presentation for tonight's meeting, and as you can see on the screen, a brief agenda will be shared. We'll talk a bit about the Ontario Line overview and what kind of progress that has been made to date. We'll also discuss some construction look-aheads, and what we'll be discussing about is piling construction, which you've noticed has been happening at Moss Park, and what to come, and that's going to be excavation. More on that. Of course, we'll talk about reducing impacts, and then there'll be a portion for question and answers. Just on the right of your screen here, there are some guidelines and good remindful tips of how to be respectful in the space, both for you and the folks who are on the other end of this call. During the Q&A portion, we're going to ask people to have one question at a time, so everybody has an opportunity to have their questions answered. If there is time, we will ensure that you can have another opportunity to ask a question. Next slide, please. So in order to ask questions, we have prepared a Slido. A Slido is essentially a website where you can submit questions and you can have them answered during tonight's meeting. The chat function on your screen will also be enabled at the Q&A portion of tonight's meeting. So once that chat function is open, then you can insert your question right there. Or of course, you can ask anonymously through Slido. My colleague Bradley is going to actually include the link into the chat for you so you have easy access to it. And we have prepared questions already and answers for some of the questions that which we've received. You're going to have to enter in a code here on the left of your screen in order to get to the correct Slido associated with tonight's meeting, or you can easily scan the QR code you see on your screen here. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Well, about the Ontario Line, I'm sure many of you have already heard of it. It's a new transit rapid transit project being built in downtown Toronto. It's going to be a 15-station subway line and above ground line. You see here on the left of the screen, there's several different colors being depicted, and the pink is where the transit line will be above ground, and then blue back toward underground. At Moss Park, it will be an underground stop at the Moss Park station. The reason why the Ontario line is built is to bring relief to the already congested transit options available in the city. It's also going to be a great help to get people to jobs and improve transit access to those who currently don't have access to it. The way the project was planned was to encourage different connections across the existing transit options that are available, such as the TTC's Line 1 and Line 2, where two interchange stations will be built at Osgood and at Queen stations. This is where the existing Line 1 TTC stations are. There will also be a station at Exhibition Station, which currently is home to GO Transit's GO station for the Lakeshore West line. There will also be another interchange station at PAPE, although this evening we will only be speaking to stations being built south and where it shows the number 1, a quote just to Moss Park, in fact. Next, please. Ontario Transit Group, or you might hear me refer to them as OTG, is a joint venture between Ferrovial Construction and Vinci Construction. OTG has been selected to build the southern portion of the Ontario Line stations and responsible for the tunneling, which will begin at Exhibition, in the west, until Corktown into the east. That includes one above ground station at Exhibition that will be integrated with the existing GO station network, and then 2 underground stations. This is Osgood and Queen to meet with the existing TTC Line 1, and then 4 other stations, including King Bathurst, Queen Spadina, Corktown, and then Moss Park, which will be a new station in your community. This also includes a 6-kilometer tunnel associated from Exhibition to the Don Yard portal. A portal is essentially a large hole in the ground where the subway will enter the earth and exit the earth. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to hand it over to one of my colleagues, Eric, and Eric will tell you a little bit about our construction look ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Good evening, everyone. I believe I've had the pleasure of interacting and meeting most of you who would be here tonight, but if that hasn't been the case and you are new, my name is Eric and I'm responsible for the construction of the Moss Park station here in the community. To give you a brief overview of kind of what we've been doing so far this year in the spring and then what to look forward to. As Ross detailed before, our efforts have been primarily focused on the piling operation at Moss Park. If you are familiar with the area, you would have seen 2 drill rigs working since the April timeframe, very proactively every single day from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m. And that was to complete all 408 piles, which is necessary for the next step. The next step being the excavation program, for which we're here to talk about specifically tonight. And things are going well. If you recall from the piling information session that we hosted in March, the original expectation was an April to end of July timeframe. I'm happy to say that we've improved upon that expectation. We've currently installed approximately 75% of the piles. I think we just surpassed number 300 today. And that leaves us approximately 3 weeks left to complete the remaining 108 piles. So good news in that perspective. We're starting off on the right foot, and by the end of June and first week of July, we're happy to be looking forward to the excavation program. But let's look forward. Let's look forward to this excavation here and give you a little bit more context on what to expect. The excavation program is a little bit longer duration, the piling only taking about 3 months. The excavation is going to be considerably longer. Our baseline program anticipates almost a year in terms of program length. So if we start in the July timeframe, The latest that we'd be looking to finish is July 2025 to get to the bottom of the excavation. Naturally, we're always looking for improvements and opportunities to improve upon those timings, though. So we'll see how it progresses here through the summer, fall, and winter timeframe, and through progressive updates in our CLCs. We can share together on how we progress and prepare to get to the bottom of the station. Next slide, Amanda, please. So very high-level overview of kind of what to expect here and how we're going to begin the excavation program. First, a little context on some of the visuals we like to try and provide everyone. This is going to be a model of the station here in the beginning of the excavation. You can see on the right-hand side what would be Sherbourne Street, the arena, Moss Park Arena in the background. And, you know, this perspective would be from the Queen Street perspective, looking in towards the construction site. As you will see, we'll begin excavation more or less on the west side of the shaft, which would be our Queen Street entrance, the gate that you would see, whilst simultaneously installing what we call the bracing or struts and wailers. You'll hear me refer to several times tonight, on the east side of the shaft. And that can be seen here in the pink bars or the pink pipes that you would see on the right-hand side of the shaft. And naturally, this is all encompassed inside of the piling program that I've talked about that we've been working through the spring. So the piling was the start of the excavation program. And now with them being completed in the next couple of weeks here, we'll be able to begin the process that you see visually with some excavation equipment and installation of bracing. Next slide, please, Amanda. Thank you. As we progress deeper into the shaft, it's going to be very much a dance of excavation and bracing installation. Here you get a little bit more context of kind of the amount of supports that we're going to be putting in the shaft through the soils specifically. The blue pipes you would see would be support systems that we install, allowing us to dig deeper in sequential lifts. And then you also have an example of the interaction with the pink struts being installed, again, on the right side. Once those are installed, then we would be able to complete digging the pocket underneath that. So it's very much a dynamic dance, as I've talked about, of installing the bracing, allowing us to dig down in levels, and that'll be consistent through the excavation of the soils for the next few months. For context, you know, when I say a wailer, you can kind of see here in the description, there's the wailer in the background. And basically, it's just a beam that goes around the perimeter of the shaft. And the struts, or the terminology strut that I like to refer to, is the pipe or the bracing that kind of wedges in between the walls or the corners that you see. And those provide the rigidity to the system in order for the adjacent grounds not to move. Additionally, in this picture here, if you wouldn't mind going back for 1 second, Amanda, additionally in the picture here, you see kind of some additional support methodologies that we'll be using, namely the tower crane. I know we have shared information on some of the expectations for the tower cranes previously in information sessions in the CLC, but it becomes a real factor for the excavation as we dig deeper. The tower crane starts to play an important role in being able to distribute materials down into the shaft, as well as bring some of the excavated soils up to the surface level for removal from the site. So we have it here noted that we're expecting roughly a September 2024 timeframe. So that's a good opportunity now to kind of discuss that expectation and begin to confirm the details for the installation of that methodology. Okay. Next slide, please, Amanda. As always, we like to try and be as visually accommodating for the community, just because I know and I understand it's not so easy to get a good perspective from the outside picture. So here is a very recent picture that we took. And again, it encompasses kind of what we've been working on here for the last few months with the piling program. You have in the foreground here some concrete and steel materials with the crane. And then, behind the crane to the back right would be the 2 drill rigs that have been working on site tirelessly here for the last few months. And again, that's installing the secant pile system. You can see visually along the hoarding or the fence, the wooden fence that, encompasses our site, the little steel piles sticking out of the ground. And so, for context, the steel that you see in the center of the frame, those long steel beams are, again, drilled into the ground, and that provides the initial set of shoring for us to begin the excavation. Okay. Next slide, Amanda, please. So a little bit more deep dive into the excavation program. So first question naturally is, why do we dig? And, to put it very simply, we have a luxury here in Moss Park in space that is, very rare in a city like Toronto. But it allows us to dig a vertical shaft down to the elevation where the bottom of the station and the tunnel will interact. And that's going to allow us to construct the station from the bottom up, which is certainly the most proficient way to go about it. In other stations, they don't have the luxury of doing an open hole installation. They have to work in caverns and tunnels, which provides more challenges. But here in Moss Park, as I said, we have that luxury. So the excavation program is a preparatory measure for us to get down to the elevation that we need to. And once we reach the elevation, then that'll allow us to commence the station installation. So following up on some of the notes here, we use some specialized equipment to remove soil and bedrock because of the depth that we go to, approximately 30 meters deep, or 100 feet if you're a fan of Imperial. It's not all soil, so we dig soil, and then underneath some of the soil is going to be what we call bedrock, which is a little bit tougher to dig through. But it's very much those two systems to get down to the elevation that we need to. And again, the secant walls that we have drilled or in the process of drilling here in Moss Park are the starting system. You get a good visualization here in the picture to the right of kind of how that interaction works. Around the perimeter, you'll see a very good example of secant piles here. It's not going to look so much different in Moss Park from this example. The only difference is, our system's a little bit more robust in terms of those struts and the whalers that I detailed in kind of the high level picture here, which are not present in this example. So a little bit more robust, but that's just a design factor that we have to implement here in Moss Park. Next slide, please, Amanda. And again, so this is more context on kind of the interface of what we dig through. The first 13 meters through the secant piles or adjacent to the secant piles is mostly soil, what we call soil. Should be relatively easy to dig through, and that's supported by the strut and whaler systems with the secant piles along the edge of the shaft around the perimeter. Once we get to bedrock, the methodology changes a little bit. So, roughly around 13 meters into the ground, we start to have to dig through the rock, and the process for that is going to be use excavators to kind of break down the rock into a little bit more manageable size to remove from the shaft. And instead of secant piles, we use a system called shotcrete and rock dowels, which very simply are a concrete wall with anchors into the ground that just hold back the existing infrastructure, the existing ground from collapsing within the site. Technically speaking, it's a very simplistic approach, but highly effective at making sure the adjacent ground doesn't move so that we don't affect any adjacent structures. Queen Street, Sherbourne Street, the arena, the armory, or your residences or businesses on the south side of Queen. These measures are all for making sure that they're unaffected during the construction. Next slide, Amanda, if you wouldn't mind, please. A little bit more into the nitty gritty. Most people are always interested in kind of specific details in terms of timing and schedule, rightfully so. So as I detailed before, because of the good progress through the piling program, we are expecting to start the excavation program here in July, so just in a few weeks' time. And that could extend as late through July 2025, depending on how the program goes. The expected hours of work, as detailed here, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. We very much like to respect people's, evening times and not encroach in that. We've tried very hard through the piling program to respect that and to not work beyond 7 p.m. And I think we've done a very good job at that. So the expectation moving forward that doesn't change for the excavation program. But naturally, under special circumstances, if we have a specific deadline that we have to meet, maybe to install one of the struts or the whalers that I talked about before, maybe a specific night requires a little bit of longer duration. So it could be possible that we work up to 11, but our goal is to never work beyond that in respect to people's evening times and sleep schedules, obviously. Naturally, we have the caveat that, this information could change slightly, but we've worked well up to this point under these parameters, and we like to maintain them. If they are expected to change, then we would communicate that with the community before and work with you guys to make sure that everyone understands the reasons why this would change. Next slide, please, Amanda. So what to expect? First off, and not in the points here, but with pilings, the piling program completing here in a few weeks, the large drill rigs that you see on the site will demobilize. They will leave Moss Park, and we will bring in a new set of equipment that the community would actually be familiar with in the winter timeframe when we were doing the site preparation and the working platform preparation. I know that you guys were seeing all of the excavators, the dozers, the trucks that we were using to kind of construct that working platform. It's very much the same machinery in the terms of excavation context. The excavators will dig the material, the dirt or the bedrock, and we'll use them to load the trucks to remove this material from site. As the expectation, pretty much status quo from what we even have now with the concrete trucks, but these triaxles or dump trucks, what we call dump trucks, will enter and leave the site daily, and that is to remove the material as we excavate it from the shaft. Naturally, all of the control measures that we have in place and have been quite effective to this point, the signs, the lights, the flagging personnels, the barricades on the sidewalks when construction traffic is going in and out, they will all be maintained throughout the excavation program. As we said, they're highly effective in promoting a very safe and efficient interaction between the public and construction vehicles, and we'd like to maintain that process. And then for the duration of this program, the materials and the equipment should stay relatively the same. We're not expecting the program to change in that capacity. Next slide, Amanda, please. In terms of noise generation, so as I said before, I think we have a pretty good understanding from a community perspective on kind of what to expect from noise from the winter months. The machines are not changing relatively in terms of what you see here: dump trucks, excavators, dozers. I can say with confidence here that the piling machines, the two drill rigs, were relatively impactful in terms of a noise perspective, and so we're looking forward to the excavation program. I think we will see a decline in noise generation, a little bit less invasive or abrasive from these types of machines. And more specifically, as we go down into the shaft, a larger distance is created from the source of the noise to the local community, right? To this date, we've been working at the street level, with a very short distance in terms of mitigation. We have our mitigation measures in terms of the noise suppression, like the hoarding, for example. But as we dig down into the shaft again, we are distancing ourselves from the community and providing an additional barrier to kind of mitigate the noise impact. So I think as a general tone moving forward, or an expectation that the sense of noise or the perceptibility of noise should be lessened as we move forward from day to day, which certainly should be a good thing for the community. And then, some people might actually recall from the working platform preparation, we had compactors on site that were compacting the ground in order to make a good, stable working platform. There was some discussion with the community in terms of vibration, but the excavation program does not use compactors. So again, another highlight in terms of what to expect in that capacity. So with us removing material from site and excavating it, the expectation in terms of vibration as well should be lesser. So certainly we're appreciative of the community allowing us to conduct the piling process. I know some days may have been frustrating, but we're appreciative on allowing us get through this process, and then moving forward, as I said, the general expectation is a more positive outlook in that capacity. Next slide, Amanda, please. For the impacts that you would be perceivable, let's talk about some mitigation measures. Naturally, this slide is very informative. There's a lot of words. I'm not going to read each line by line to you. Kind of, if you would like to take the time later to go through the recording and kind of read, but all it's detailing are the possible routes for the trucking, and the expectation, truthfully, is not changing in terms of what we would have presented before. For the piling operations, as I said, we've been working here for several months now with trucks entering and leaving site, with relative success. We try and respect the roads in the community as much as possible, keeping the roads clean, keeping the interactions positive in terms of the community, and then using the approved route. So again, this sheet is just a written context on the routes, but I'll ask Amanda to go to the next slide so that we can provide a little bit more visual context on what to expect. So for vehicles entering into Moss Park, construction vehicles entering the site, we have been primarily using the Queen Street entrance right now with some good success, and it'll be maintained for the time being. In order for trucks to get there, they are either using Sherbourne Street and turning left, or using Jarvis Street and turning right, and then entering the site through the Queen Street entrance. If and when it's decided that we want to use the Sherbourne entrance as well, you'll see here that the trucks actually come from the north, and so for extra context, the trucks would travel north on Jarvis, they would travel east on Dundas, and then south on Sherbourne to enter with a right-hand turn into the site. Of course, that's with the expectation of respecting, very sensitive roads like a Shooter Street, which is primarily a hospital route, for example. Coincidentally, for trucks exiting site, I would say 99% of our trucks have exited west to Jarvis, and then use Jarvis and the main arterial roads to kind of get to the Don Valley Parkway or the Gardiner, depending on where they're going. And the expectation is that we maintain that as often as possible. I'll preface the conversation here with the context that both visually and in the notes, we do have George Street as an alternative. There are community council discussions on some sensitive time hours on a left-hand turn at Jarvis, based on traffic frequencies and tendencies. So if it does become enforced where we're not allowed to turn left on Jarvis, as an example, then the possibility exists where we may have to use George Street for short durations. But obviously, we're very aware of the nature of that road, and it's a last resort. It's something that we don't want to use. We would like to continue using Jarvis Street as much as possible. Next slide, Amanda, please. And again, so some of the control measures and mitigation measures to kind of promote these positive interactions. All of the existing facilities will remain open for this program, the excavation program. We do not impede on the sidewalk permanently. Bike lanes, road closures, parking spots, they're all maintained. And again, there may be a special circumstance where we may have to make use of one of these facilities for a very short duration, but those are very special and unique circumstances that we don't have forecasted at the time being. No impacts to public transit, the streetcars and other services on Queen Street, for example. Bike lanes are expected to be fully maintained and operational. And then we use this as an opportunity to just to be mindful of the interactions of the construction traffic and work with our flaggers to promote that positive interaction that I've talked about before. Next slide, please, Amanda. So yeah, noise impacts. As I detailed before, I think the tone moving forward is on a positive note. Naturally, all of the mitigation measures that we would have had in place already will still be maintained. The hoarding, the distance, promoting a always forward methodology to reduce the amount of reversing vehicles, as the backup alarms can be sensitively percepted at times. So all of these methodologies that we've had in place at Moss Park will continue to be implemented and enforced to mitigate this impact as much as possible. Obviously, with the summer months coming around, and even experience to an extent through the piling operation, air quality is a big topic. With a lot of construction vehicles going every single day, there is some dust generation at times, and we have employed several mitigation factors to suppress that as often as possible and keep that under control so that people can enjoy the outdoors as through the summer months. And then, as I said before, keeping the streets clean, street sweepers, cleaning factors, proactive measures such as the mud mat that you see in the picture here to kind of knock off any mud during rainy days and preventing it from being transmitted onto the public roadways. Ultimately, our goal is to also implement a paved surface for the construction vehicles. And so if you recall one of the earlier slides where we have the access route and simply put it's from the Sherbourne Gate to the Queen Street Gate, we will be installing a paved surface. And again, that's just to promote a good air quality environment. If trucks are staying on a paved surface, is less kicking up of dust or debris, and ultimately, producing a cleaner environment during the workforce. So during the summer months, that expectation can be anticipated, and we'll look to implement that in the near future. Next slide, Amanda, please. And then, as always, we're monitoring our effect on or our impact on the community. We have several degrees of monitors in every aspect, in terms of vibration, in terms of noise, in terms of disturbance to the ground through what we call the GMPs, or the ground monitoring points. All of these are instruments that we use daily and refer to daily to make sure that we are having the least impact possible on the community, and making sure that your properties, your homes, your businesses, your infrastructure, your sidewalks are unaffected by our presence as much as possible. Next slide, Amanda, please. I already touched on this a little bit before, but again, through the summer months, it will be a very sensitive topic that we will pay a great deal attention to, is to suppress the dust. And again, that's to promote a positive outdoor atmosphere, so that we don't impact people's enjoyment of the local community, being outside in the nice weather. Here you have pictures in the bottom right of kind of the implementation measures that we're practicing. Very simply, it's spreading water through every operation, whether it's our traveled pathways, which is the bottom left picture, or spraying water on the drill rigs, as you see in the bottom right, to saturate what otherwise would be, very dry, dusty material that could easily be picked up by the machines. So these measures will continue to be enforced and implemented through the excavation program, and we trust that it's going to be effective in maintaining a dust suppressed zone. And I think with that, I think I can hand it back to Mr. Ross. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you, everybody. I know that was a lot of information at once. And naturally, you may have some questions. And we've come to that point in the meeting where Bradley will enable the chat function where you can type your questions in. Or should you prefer to speak, please raise your hand. There's a raise hand function at the top of the screen, and we will answer your question to the best of our ability. So I'll give folks a moment if they have a question to use that raise hand function, or to insert their question into the chat. The chat is now open. Okay, I see a question in the chat by a fellow Anderson, David Anderson. David's question is, how does Metrolinx and OTG plan to create opportunities for Moss Park residents during the excavation process under Pillar 1 of Metrolinx's 4-pillar community benefits program? And how long will progress on targets be communicated to the community? Thank you for your question, David. And just to clarify, the opportunities David seems to be referring to are employment opportunities. And James, I see you've come on camera. So this question is twofold. Perhaps we can speak to David's first part of the question, how OTG and Metrolinx will create jobs for Moss Park residents.
For sure. Thanks, Ross, and thanks for the question, David. So for those who may not be aware, Metrolinx has a community benefits program, and that program looks at ways that the transit projects that can give back to communities, can create lasting impact, improving public spaces, employment opportunities, and that's in addition to the inherent benefits that these types of transit projects bring. And the community benefits program, I can see from the question, the David, you're quite familiar with the program, but for those who may not be, the program has 4 pillars. So the first pillar is employment opportunities. Our second pillar is local business supports. The third pillar is community improvement supports, and the fourth pillar is public realm improvements. And the first pillar around employment opportunities, it looks at workforce development opportunities associated with our projects. And in terms of those opportunities, specifically for this part of the project and OTG, who's here this evening, they did recently hold an industry expo or a job fair downtown, promoting opportunities for folks, in the area, opportunities associated with the project. So there were Ontario Transit Group and then various other employers in the supply chain were in attendance with the fair and sharing opportunities with attendees. I would like to invite colleagues from OTG. I don't know if we have the right folks from OTG on the call to speak to this, but if we happen to, if anyone would like to chime in and speak a bit about employment opportunities associated with the project, and in particular, I believe the question touches on upcoming phase of excavation. I'd invite a chime in at this point.
Hi, James. It's Allison Dewhurst. I'm the Community Engagement and Communications lead for Ontario Transit Group, and I apologize, all my cameras malfunctioning this evening. But thanks all for joining the meeting. I can speak to employment at Ontario Transit Group. So all of the open roles at Ontario Transit Group are posted on our LinkedIn page. I'll drop a link into the chat specific to that. So any roles that are open on the project would be posted there. I will say, and I'm dotted line connected to our HR team, some of the roles are through unions, just the way in which the specific type of job and the specific type of work is being offered. But any of the open roles that we do have are posted on that website, and that's kept up to date when anything new pops up as well.
Thank you for that answer, James, and Allison. Thank you for that answer too.
Sorry, if I could, and thank you, Allison. Sorry, if I could just to add a bit of rounding it. I think there was a question around reporting back to the community on this, and just wanted to make sure we address that as well. So, I would say I think this seems to me like prime candidate for us to take away and think about how we can best report back on this at a future meeting. So thank you for bringing this up, and this highlights the interactive nature of our engagement. So hearing this as a topic of interest, we'll take it away and think about how to cover this as part of future sessions.
Thank you, James. Would anybody like to ask a question by raising their hand? If not, I will go to the Slido questions. Some of the questions asked from Slido have been addressed through the meeting, but I'd like to ask a question that I see here on Slido that has not yet perhaps been addressed during the meeting. And the question in Slido is, how many trucks can we expect in and out of the neighborhood during excavation?
Good question. The target amount depends on whether we're digging through soil or the rock. I don't like to get overly technical to provide long-winded answers, but very simply put, if we estimate roughly 500 cubic meters a day of soil excavation, it would translate to roughly 50 trucks as an example. And then the amount gets slightly lower as we go into the bedrock. The bedrock is a little bit more challenging to dig through, as I detailed before. And, instead of 50 trucks, it would be either 40, 35. It depends on the progress specifically. But I think from a community's perspective and, sharing with you all the expectation, 500 cubic meters of material is a very good baseline expectation to set with you guys. And with each of those dump trucks or triaxles that we call them that I shared with you in the picture before, carrying roughly 10 cubic meters each, then, let's say as a baseline standard, 50 trucks coming in and out of the site per day. It's not all at once, obviously, from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. They would be staggered to having only coming in 4 or 5 trucks per hour. So it's not like there's going to be traffic associated with an overabundance of construction vehicles. But from a big picture, when you consider 50 trucks coming in and out of the site each day is a considerable number. But I think that's a good expectation to set with the community, and hope that provides you the context you're looking for.
Thank you, Eric. I don't see any new questions in the chat, and I don't see anybody with their hands raised. I'm going to go back to Slido and see what questions are waiting. Question in Slido is, what controls and mechanisms and monitoring systems are in place to check acceptable noise levels? Amanda, I might ask you to go back to our noise and vibration slide. But the question here continues as, how often are noise levels assessed, and who is responsible for recording or reporting excess noise levels?
Aga, did you want to take that, or I'm happy to answer if you would prefer?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. So we measure noise emissions on live, really. So we are able to access our monitoring devices outputs, analyze. If we see raised levels, we are able to contact the team, ask the question, what kind of activity is in place? Can we minimize? Can we mitigate? So we are able to step in immediately and provide mitigation whenever possible.
I think just to add a little bit of extra context there, thank you, Aga. The real-time response is very real. If you'll see in my camera, I don't have such a nice backdrop as my colleagues who are sharing the screen. I'm on site physically every single day. I'm here in the trailer, and with the real-time data, if there are any exceedances, or alternatively, if complaints are received through the communication channel and is escalated from Metrolinx to OTG, then we address it in real time. We go and physically look at maybe what would be the root cause, or provide a mitigation or response measure, as Aga has detailed. But that real time interactive is real. We're here as a management crew on the site daily, and we live and breathe the experience with you guys every single day. So it's not to say that we work in an office several kilometers away. We're here trying to deliver the product as best as we can, which involves impacting the community as least as possible.
Great. Thank you so much, Aga and Eric. I think I saw a hand raised, but it was lowered shortly after. This would be a good opportunity to ask one of our construction teams a question. And there it is. I see a hand raised. Emily, I apologize if I mispronounced your name, but I've allowed your microphone if you'd like to ask your question. Emily?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, is it Emily?
It's yes, Emily. My thing is about noise and dust. Of course, I live right across the street from you guys. And for example, when it comes to the noise mitigation stuff, last week when you had the 2 burrowers going, plus you had the vacuum truck going, we were in excess of 95 decibels all morning long. It drove us nearly mad. And so when you guys say you're trying to mitigate stuff, I don't see it, because you're torturing us. This is not just, this stuff is abusive to the point of torture. And right now we're going till 5:36 p.m., 7 p.m., 11 p.m. Oh my God. You're going to need to rent us a mental hospital to go into, because I don't know how we're going to cope with this. It's just so incredibly loud. And the dust as well. You guys have little, buckets of water that you're throwing on things. It's kind of like urinating on a forest fire. We're getting these, not just dust, but we're getting sandstorms. And we're not just having our windows and doors open so that we can enjoy the outside. We don't have any air conditioning. We have to. Our choice is to either put up with the sandstorms and the excessive deafening noise or cook to death. And next week, we're looking at temperatures of 30 and 31 degrees. How are we going to survive this?
All right. Well, thank you for your question. And I just want to first respond and apologize for, the inconvenience it's caused you. Nobody wants to be kept up with noise. Nobody wants to leave their homes to dirt and dust outside. So I apologize that you're experiencing that. I'm gonna hand it over to Eric because I know we did talk a little bit about we called like water suppressing the dust and other tactics that are being done. But Eric, considering the temperatures are rising and this resident has mentioned it's very dusty, very loud, is there anything more that can be done, or how often is the dust mitigation efforts happening? Maybe we can speak to that.
For sure, for sure. And again, to reiterate kind of what Ross was saying, Emily, we are sympathetic to the situation you're experiencing. That's why we're here physically to try and mitigate and understand as best as possible. First, for the noise. So I think the example that you used is understandably fair. The hydrovac trucks are naturally very loud. And truthfully, we were starting at the beginning of this project using those at night. It received a very negative feedback or response from the community, to which 100% we agreed with. They're very loud and invasive machines. And immediately we revised kind of the methodologies that we were requiring to use machines. I say the word required because it's important to detail that. It's not to create an excuse, but to help understand the hydrovac trucks are a requirement at specific times. They are mandated through bylaws and through regulations for interacting with existing utilities. It is the safest and, as I said, standard specific way to do something what we call daylighting them, and that's to make sure that we don't knock out your water services or your power services or your internet. They are requirements. So we look to plan and use those vehicles as infrequently as possible. I can say that through the last several months, they haven't really been used in Moss Park. In this past week, we were required to use one, and you're correct in saying that it was here. But please be advised, we do understand the challenge associated with those, and we look to reduce using them as much as possible. In terms of the dust, there's always opportunities to improve, and we are always trying to make enhancements in that capacity. So the pictures that I shared with you before, kind of spreading the water through either through the machines or through the hoses, is a baseline that we've used in the piling program. We are looking at more opportunities to implement as soon as possible. An example that I can share with you that we're actively looking on is implementing a sprinkler system. So there is a fire hydrant at our Queen Street gate that we have interacted with the city with to kind of take ownership of and allow us to draw water from for extended durations. And through what we call our site servicing, which, to put very simply, is our network of water and power to build the station, we are looking at introducing a sprinkler system, very much on a small scale in a yard, to sprinkle your yard to keep it saturated so the grass can grow. We're looking at a more industrial level to help with dust suppression. So through implementation of the system, in the next month time frame, our goal is to enhance the dust suppression measures and again to allow you to not have the experience that you detailed here before. We do have the CLCs every single month, so it's opportunities for us to connect and kind of show the improvements that we've been working on a month-to-month basis and try and work with you guys. So I invite for you to allow me, to the next CLC to try and improve on these measures and in a month's time here in the July timeframe when we sit down again together. I hope that your experience has changed for a more positive nature.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. And I hope that gives you some peace of mind. And you always have Zara and myself and Mark and our whole community engagement team. If problems should arise, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us, because we on the community engagement team have a direct line with OTG and folks like Eric. And if there's something happening in real time, we can have that addressed immediately. I want to go back to Slido and bring a question that I see here. A question that came in Slido is, could we please get a larger map showing the plans for all station haul routes that go through Toronto Centre? It's hard to provide fulsome comments when looking at one station at a time. Great question. And I think we do have a map somewhere, don't we, James?
So yes, so appreciate the question and getting the full view on all of the various Ontario Line construction sites through the downtown. Our traffic team has been working very closely with City of Toronto Transportation Services and working overall with the city on construction project coordination. And so happy to share overall plans. So for the person who put this request in, if you could just let us know how to best get in touch with you and provide that info, that would be great. Happy to share, and thanks for asking.
Hey, thanks so much, James. And I see a question came in the chat here about excavation. And the question here is, as you proceed to excavate the bedrock, what change in noise levels can we expect? Now, Eric, would there be a change in noise levels when excavating through bedrock, or would it be consistent throughout the entire excavation project?
Yeah, I would expect that the noise generated as a source itself is not really going to change so much from the bedrock or the soil. Chipping the rock manageable pieces, as I detailed before, kind of sounds impactful and disturbing, but truthfully, it's not so bad. The bedrock is a harder material. But it's not so challenging to the fact that we need to, be like bulldozers or wrecking balls. It's a controlled methodology, and as I detailed before, the most impactful and light at the end of the tunnel, let's call it, or things to look forward to, is the distance that we're creating from the community by going down into the shaft now. So. We really haven't allowed ourselves any grace in terms of space by working at the surface level. We are immediately adjacent to you guys in terms of that capacity when we work at the surface, and there's a lot of challenges that are associated with that, obviously. But 30 meters down or 100 feet down is quite a depth. And as we go down deeper and deeper into the shaft, we're creating that distance and we're creating that barrier, or the hole, let's call it very specifically, that is naturally going to suppress the noise. So if there's something that you take away in terms of the noise generation, again, as we start, it's going to be what we've experienced back in the winter timeframe when I was doing the working platform. Same machines, same ideology. But as we move forward into the midsummer, late summer, fall, and winter, I'm deeper and deeper into the shaft, and I fully expect that you recognize my presence less and less, just because of that barrier and the distance that's created.
Hey, thanks so much for that, Eric. There's another question here in Slido that I find interesting. And the question is about the building aesthetics, the head house. Question asks, why is this nothing more than a square glass box? And I'm going to ask Amanda to please pull the rendering up on the screen so we can take a look at it together. And perhaps I'll ask my colleague James Francis to talk a little bit about why this design of the head house is made in such a way that it's transparent, similar to the renderings we see at other stations, like the brand new Osgood station.
Great. Thanks, Ross, and thanks, Amanda, for pulling up the rendering. So as folks can see, and as is mentioned in the question, the station has a rather light appearance. So, it's largely transparent looking in from, this is, Queen Street and Sherbourne looking west towards Yonge Street. And you can see some street trees towards Queen from the station head house. What's not actually shown in this image is a bit of a, fast forward the timeline, and what will this look like, a few years after station construction is completed. I'd like to speak about that a bit in terms of the context here. So, we're building what our working name for the station is Moss Park Station. We're very aware that we're building that station within Moss Park, and that's in a context of the city's plans to revitalize Moss Park. So being really aware of that context, our goal has been to bring subway service to this neighborhood, to this community, to this part of downtown, while also minimizing impacts to the park and to that future park revitalization. So to do that, we've worked to minimize our, Ross called it the head house. It's our station entrance or exit building, to just what we need for the future passenger flows. And we've also aimed to make the station as kind of unobtrusive and light on the landscape as we can, which is why it's as transparent as it can be, so that it's not detracting from the surroundings and the park. And so, in that fast forwarded future environment, based on the city's plans, there will be replanting of trees over the majority of what is now that construction site, that piling zone that's headed into excavation. That will be, aside from our station building, that will be future park space with trees that you would see in that fast forwarded scenario coming up behind and around that station box. So we'll have a lovely green space in future based on the city's plans. And minimizing that station head house and keeping that as small and unobtrusive as possible really allows for maximal replanting of trees in the space. We recognize that we did have to take down a number of trees in this area, and they are a precious resource in the downtown, and very happy to be able to have replantings over almost the entire station area in future. So we have been working very closely with the city for the past number of years on how to design a station that we think best fits with park revitalization and with the neighborhood. So thanks for the question, and thanks for I guess providing an opportunity to share a bit about our thinking on the approach to the look and feel of the station.
Great. Thanks so much for that response, James. And for folks on the call, it's also important to remember that these are also renderings. Although this is an artist's depiction of what the station could look like, these renderings could change. With that said, it is 8:01 p.m. and I want to be respectful to everybody's time this evening. And with that, I'm going to ask Amanda to bring us to our final slides of the presentation. You can always stay in touch with us, myself, or Zara, or Mark, or our Ontario Line community engagement team as a whole. You'll see our email here on the left-hand column of the screen, along with a 24/7 actively monitored phone number. Please take note of it. And our newsletter also is a great resource to learn not only about what's happening in the community of Moss Park, but along the entire Ontario Line alignment. If you scan this QR code with your smartphone device, you'll be able to easily sign up for this newsletter. Or if you prefer to follow us on social media, you can see that our handle here is consistent among Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. This is not going to be the only time and only opportunity you have to hear from us or to speak to us. we do like to consider that we have an open door policy. And if you had a question and you didn't have an opportunity to ask it tonight, or we didn't give you an answer that really satisfied your question, then please call us, write to us, or come to our community office, because we encourage having fulsome conversations, and we would be happy to sit down with you. I know James would, and I know many folks on the OTG team would be more than happy to go through this presentation with you again in a little bit more detail. Now, with that said, I'd like Amanda to take us to the last slide. Well, we all sign off for the evening, and I just wish everybody to have a great evening tonight and stay safe out there. Bye.
Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night.